Good day, friends. Maloa here. Thank you so much for coming. Today we are going to do a deep dive into Hiddenhoard Tier 3 Boss 2. I have my great friend here, Daughion, who you've seen on our live streams. He plays our main Cappy tank, and he will be bringing that perspective to all of this.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here, Maloa. Appreciate the chance to help out other people to figure out how this all works. Should be a lot of fun.
Now, the first thing you need to know about putting together your team for Hiddenhoard Tier 3 Boss 2 is how you need to set up your fellowships. So typically what we like to run for Fellowship 1 is 2 tanks, a guards tank and a cappy tank. Then we have 2 support classes, Lore Master Burglar, then the Rune Keeper and the Bear. The reason why the Rune Keeper is in the tank group is because the Rune Keeper will focus solely on healing the tanks. Bear will focus on the entire Fellowship group. And then in the Fellowship 2 group, we have the Red Cappy, the Minstrel, and then all of our DPS.
Absolutely right. The reason that we've just got the Hunter listed here for our DPS is because we like to run Hunters as much as possible in this arena. It just makes things a lot simpler for the fight. You can run with a Champ, or you can run with a Warden, or technically even a Red RK as well, but it makes things a little bit different in how you have to approach things. In the tank group, there's a couple of things that you can change just a little bit. Some groups will run a Brawler instead of the Guardian, but most groups will bring the Captain specifically because of all of the buffs that they can bring to survival within that group. Most of the time you're going to be running with these exact healers, so you're going to want to have the Bear in the tank group because they can hit the entire raid wide as well, while the Mini can only hit their Fellowship with most of their AoE heals. So that's why we typically have them in the DPS group to help keep them alive.
In this fight, there are a couple of phases that we're going to deal with. The first one is the add waves, and you will have orcs coming out at 90% of the boss's health, worms coming out at 60%, and a combined wave of orcs and worms coming out at 30%. Then the second type of mechanic that the boss does is he does a huge ground smash AoE throughout the entire arena. What you want to do is you want to hide behind the walls, run up the steps and hide behind the walls when he does that so that you can survive. There are boxes that will light up on the floor that'll show you where to stand. Now, he does that at 75%, 50%, and 25% of his health. So after you do this last 25%, you will burn the boss down to 20%, and then his morale is going to magically jump back up to 40%. At that point, it becomes a DPS race. There will be 4 chains around the arena that we'll talk about later on how to get him down all the way.
The map that we have of the arena here is kind of blurry a little bit, but it was the best we could come up with here at the beginning of this. We've sectioned it off into a grid from A through L and 0 through 11 just to make it a little bit easier to reference things. The boss is going to be coming from the north up at the top at the stairs that you see as you walk in. And at the south, where you actually enter the room, it's actually going to cut you off from the space where you come in with a large row of spikes as well. Those spikes are also going to be at the stairs on the left and right, which will actually come down when you need to hide because you have to run past them to be able to get to the safety runes. When you start the fight, the 2 most important things that you need to know about the boss himself is that, number 1, on his actual aggro target, he applies stacks of what is called Maul, up from 1 all the way up through 10. Each of those stacks actually decreases the amount of healing that that target receives, increases the amount of damage that they take, and also decreases their run speed, all 3 of these things, by 10% for each stack. He applies one of these stacks approximately every 15 seconds, assuming he's not running during the time when he would normally apply it. So when you're working with a 2-tank strategy here, you're working with 1 tank starting off, taking enough stacks such that they can live through it, And then at a certain point, the other tank taking over and then starting to build stacks on themselves while the other tank lets them wear off before taking the boss back. The second mechanic about the boss itself is that, again, every now and then, I believe it's approximately every 20 to 30 seconds, he will also do a large AoE damage around his target that also knocks people back. So you have to be able to figure out how to position correctly such that he's not going to hit anybody else when he does that attack. So at the beginning of the fight here, what we normally do is we take the Guardian at the very beginning, moving forward to actually aggro the boss, and just move him into a corner or just along the wall, somewhere such that the Guardian can be up against the wall and the boss is facing him, while pretty much everyone else is on a different side. Once you get to a certain point of stacks, usually around 2 or 3 stacks, the Guardian wants the captain to take over so that the Guardian can actually start that timer of those buffs wearing off. So then the captain would take over and the Guardian would move away to allow his to drop off. During this time, the rest of the people in Fellowship 1, for example, the LM, the Burglar, the RK, the Bear, they can all just be standing out away from where the actual tank is at the time, such that they're not getting frontaled, but the tank is still taking the damage at the edge of the arena. Most of the time with our group, we're able to burn through 10% of the boss's health pretty quickly. So, using Oathies and other buffs like Ancient Craft and things like that, we're able to get the boss down to 90% in a relatively quick timing, such that the captain actually takes the boss's aggro right around the 91% mark, such that the Guardian can be ready for the next phase when it comes.
Now, the red cappy will be behind the boss, and he will throw Oathies on the boss about 10 to 15 seconds after the Guardian has secured the boss in a position. This gives enough time for the hunters to really get ready for their big blasts, and they will then burn the boss down very quickly. We typically like to run at least 4 hunters because of the big single target damage that they can do on the boss. The minstrel here will be hanging out with the healers and all of this. At this point, only the tank that is tanking the boss, in this case the guard, will be taking damage. So everybody, all the healers will be focusing heals on the guardian. Then at 91%, when the captain takes over tanking, everybody kind of groups up in the center. And what's going to happen is the RK is going to hit their bubble.
In the first wave, of course, there's going to be quite a lot of mobs coming out here, and this is going to be a little bit chaotic for the first time that you see it. Now, the 4 different types of mobs that come in Wave 1 on Tier 3 are Black Arrows, Sappers, Warriors, and what's called Enthralled Guardians, which is a little bit confusing with your Guardian tank, but we'll just refer to them as guards here. Black Arrows build up corruptions. Of course, they are ranged and they'll be shooting people quite a lot. They do both a poison arrow and what is called a kill shot as well, which is very aptly named if they have targeting on somebody with medium or lower health. Sappers are a melee mob that come out and throw a bunch of puddles on the ground and apply some debuffs as well, but we can come back to talking about that in a moment. Warriors, of course, are another melee mob, which you've seen throughout the trash mobs that you've fought earlier as well. These have a reflect corruption that can be removed, but are certainly going to be a hazard to your hunters if the reflects are not removed. And then also the Guardians, which have an area of effect damage reduction around themselves for any mobs that are around them. They build up corruptions as well, which actually increase the damage that they deal, which should be removed by the tanks while you're working on that. So, at the beginning of the wave here, there's a group of each of these that are going to be coming from both of the two side stairs, on both the west and the east. What we're going to want to do with the Guardian having just left the tank position, having the captain take over for him, the Guardian is going to move to whichever set of stairs is going to be having the black arrows get mezzed. For our group, we move him to the west because that's the side where we're going to mezz our black arrows. He's going to start off over there right as the mobs are spawning, using a war chant to grab the initial aggro on those creatures. Now, a note that I just realized myself the other day is that some of the mobs spawn in a little bit quicker than the others do. And in fact, the Guardian spawns in later than the others. So, just making sure that he gets the war chant on all of those targets so he has their initial aggro before he continues to go get others. After that, he moves through the center of the room back near to the group, back over to where the other melee mobs are going to be. While he's doing that, he actually needs to use Thrill of Danger specifically to be able to get some healing aggro to maintain the aggro that he's about to get. Without that aggro from healing himself, he actually wouldn't be able to hold the Guardians and the Warriors and such like that. So after he's moved across the room, by that point, the Warriors, the Guardians, and the Sappers on the other side will have moved in a little bit as well, and he'll use Challenge to grab those aggro. There is a chance with so many targets in the center that his challenge might not hit all of the key targets. So it's good for him to actually pay a little bit of attention at that point just to make sure that the Guardians are actually aggroed on him when he then runs to the northern stairs. At this point, he should have pretty much all of the aggression from the mobs that come out. And right around this same time, his debuffs from the boss are going to be wearing off as well. That means that the captain's going to have a lot on him for those stacks, and the Guardian's going to be wanting to take the boss aggro back as well. At this point, the captain tank, who had been working on the boss, wants to be working on grabbing the Guardian mob aggro off of the Guardian tank. As much as possible, he wants to get those Guardians away from the tank, away from the Guardian tank, and into a corner away from the damage targets as well. Now you'll notice in this, we've been killing the black arrows on the east as our first targets within the fight. So if our damage has been very slow with how the Guardian mobs are at the moment, if the damage has been slow, then we'll need to move them slightly away from the black arrow on the northeast, just to make sure that we can finish that target before moving to the black arrows on the west. At this point, the Guardian tank can actually move down into the northwest corner. Since he no longer has Guardian aggro, he's no longer making it slower to kill the black arrows on the west. He's able to hold the boss and all of the other melee units for quite a while on his own in that corner, just trying to remove corruptions from the warriors while he's doing so. The captain needs to make sure that he's also removing corruptions from the Guardian mobs, as if they tier up to a certain number of them, the damage increase can become pretty substantial and cause a problem when he has to take boss back from the Guardian tank. By that point, all of the black arrows should be dead, at which point the DPS can be working on the targets that are left, the warriors and the sappers, away from the Guardian mobs. You have to make sure throughout the entirety of your fight here that your two tanks are moving the boss back and forth as their debuffs wear off, because if they get up to about 4 or even more stacks of the Maul debuff, they're going to die very, very quickly, and your healers aren't going to be able to keep up.
As this phase starts and the Guardian runs to grab aggro on the left, what's going to happen is the LM will be coming over to the west side and mezzing the two black arrows. The burglar will be coming over to the east side and CCing the northeast black arrow, and the hunter's first kill target will be this black arrow. Once this black arrow goes down, the hunters will then focus on the second black arrow. Hopefully by that time, the Guardian will have already grabbed aggro on everything and will be positioned here in the north location. Then hunters will continue to kill this northeast black arrow. That black arrow will die. The hunters will then swap to the southwest black arrow. At this point, it frees up the burglar to come over here and start working on the warriors and removing their corruptions. By this time, the captain will have the guardians on him so that the hunters can then burn off the left side. Once the left side BAs are done, this then frees up the LM to also start working on the warriors. By now, all that you will have left is the sappers, warriors, and the guardians. So you will want to burn down the sappers first because they put bleeds on people. So you burn down the sappers, then you wait for the corruption to be removed from the warriors. You burn down the warriors. Now you only have the guardians and the boss left.
When you get to this point in the fight, there are still both guardians alive, which means if they're on a single tank, then they're buffing each other with a damage resistance that's about 2/3 of what you would be dealing out. That's pretty significant when you want to be dealing damage to a target. Also to note about killing guardians is that when they reach certain health levels, which I believe are 75, 50, 25, and 0% levels, if they are next to the boss when that happens, they'll actually buff the boss's damage for a certain amount of time by a pretty significant amount. So we want to make sure that while we're killing guardians, we have them split apart, and we also have the one that we're killing being away from the boss as well. So, once all of the other mobs have been killed, you have both the guardian tank and the captain tank, with the captain usually having both boss and both guardians at the time. At this point, whichever tank does not already have aggro on anything will want to come get both the boss and one of the guardians. They'll pull them away from the other guardian, and you'll make sure to kill the one that is away from the boss. Depending on how quick your damage is, that may die before you're able to tank swap, but if you get to a certain point of damage incoming to your tanks, that means that they will likely have to use some large cooldowns to survive during that time. So as soon as that first lone guardian dies, at that point, that tank can pull the boss away from the other one, and you'll now kill the only remaining guardian before the adds are all dead.
The reason why we put sappers so very early is because they put a bleed on their targets that can only be removed when somebody is healed back up to full. That responsibility comes down to the minstrel and the bear. What the minstrel want to do is the sappers will about 20 seconds into the fight, they will drop the bleeds on people, and they'll do it on about 4 targets at the same time. So what the minstrel want to do is hold off all big group heals until that happens. They will want to bubble and then crit triumphant spirit. That should instantaneously take care of all the bleeds on their side. Then, in collaboration with the Bjorning, they will start healing up those in the tank group, prioritizing the RK and the Bjorning, then the two tanks and the LM and the Berg. This is a very common place where groups will fail, is due to those bleeds. So the quicker you can get them down, the better. The other reason why we put black arrows first is because of their kill shots, which is aptly named. We tend to mez them first because they can be controlled. They are the only class in the game that can be CC'd indefinitely. Everything else has a skill that is called adaptability. This means that target can only be CC'd once and then never again.
Another reason that we prioritize killing the sappers before the warriors is that the way that we normally get rid of the reflection corruptions on the warriors is by using the burglar's startling twist. Now that can only hit a certain number of targets, depending on what traceries and what qualities of traceries the burglar has. So if the sappers are alive and you use twist, it may not hit all of the warriors. So we usually kill at least down to about 6 total warriors and sappers before we are really able to use twist and start AoE killing the warriors, because that can help remove all of the corruptions from those warriors. If there is still 1 or 2 sappers alive, they can also be AoE damaged down when that happens.
Now, once all the targets are down, you can see our tanks are usually up in the corner. We will all position by the stairs to wherever the tanks are, simply to be in preparation for the next phase, to get all healed back up and be good to go.
At 75% of the boss's health, the first hide phase happens. At this point, as Maloa said earlier, the boss will move to the center of the room and channel a very long and very hefty smash for the entire arena. At this point, pretty much everyone is going to be wanting to run into the stairways to either side to where there's a rune behind the pillars on the ground. It's going to be a big square on the ground that everybody wants to run into one of the 4 different ones around the arena. It doesn't really matter which ways you go, as long as everybody ends up in one of those 4 runes. After the smash happens and the whole room shakes, you run back out and you're ready to continue the fight, killing the boss further until the next add wave. What we like to do is we like to move directly to the southeastern pillar right next to the stairs with the boss and one of the tanks there, and everybody else kind of follows. Now, it's a little bit interesting when you're preparing for the next add wave at this point to decide who's going to take the boss first, who's going to take the boss second. Now, this will depend on your group of how quick your damage is, but for our group, what we've figured out is that we want the captain to be taking the damage first here, so that then the guardian can take the boss when he arrives at boss health of around 68 or maybe even 69% of his health. That allows the captain to take back over when the boss reaches right around 61%, right before the next wave starts.
So at 61%, Daughion, who's usually our yellow captain, will call that he's taking the boss. This then triggers everybody else to loosely group up in the center of the room so that we can get the RK bubble ready and be ready for the next set of ads to come.
Depending on your strategy for the next wave, the Guardian may actually run already, even before this happens, all the way up close to the northern stairs. This will allow them to pull the next set of adds that he needs from the north much quicker. On wave 2, which starts at 60% of the boss's health, there's a different set of mobs than in wave 1. At this point now you have 2 frost callers, which are orcs that both deal tactical damage and, of course, are ranged at that point, as well as dropping totems and healing mobs while they're alive. The other mobs that spawn are 2 worms that both spawn in the north and a whole bunch of whelplings that are going to spawn in the north but can't really be aggroed to a tank because they randomly target people and just run around in all mayhem the entire time. Thinking about what's happening here, the frost callers can actually be interrupted for most of their skills that they cast. They cast Heal the Warlord, which on tier 3, since you don't have an actual enrage timer on the boss, it doesn't actually matter too much whether Heal the Warlord casts or not. It would just mean that the fight would go longer in the end, if so. They also cast Healing Spores, which is almost always going to be on one of the other mobs that are alive. If you're able to, interrupting healing spores is very important because this is kind of the only DPS check that you have in the raid of how quickly can you clear a wave before people die. So being able to interrupt healing spores will allow you to kill your targets much faster and not have so much to worry about with your damage. As you're preparing for this wave to happen, your Guardian and your Lore Master probably should talk about how you want to both aggro or crowd control the mobs that are on this. Since we normally kill Frostcallers first, the ones that are oftentimes loose are the worms. Worms, spawning in the north, have, over time, a tendency to wipe their own aggro and attempt to cycle through different targets and find somebody to kill next to them. So, what we like to do is either have the Lore Master run up north, stun, mez, root, whatever they need to do to help control the worms from the north, while the Guardian is figuring out what they're doing with the aggro situation that's there. Now, I will say that if your Guardian is experienced with this, he actually can take care of both of the worms on his own without needing the Lore Master's help. That's why you should communicate it ahead of time of what you want to do with that situation. Normally, the Guardian will be tanking the worms at the north right from the very beginning of this wave. He can either be in a corner, or by the stairs, or even, honestly, even close to the room if it's helpful for the healers. The whelplings will be running around on their own, doing whatever they please and dropping puddles everywhere, which is quite a hassle for everyone else. The way that they're programmed is to run to someone, attack them once or twice, and then every couple of seconds, I don't know if it's about 15 seconds or maybe 30 seconds, they'll drop a puddle wherever they are. This can cause a lot of confusion and a lot of worry if people are just running haphazardly.
That is why it is extremely important for the rest of the team to stay as closely grouped together as possible, especially the DPS group and the minstrel. If they get split up across the room from each other, it can end up being that the hunters are outside of healing range, and those whelplings and the pedals can very easily take out your DPS group.
So while the Guardian tank is taking care of the worms in the north, he's also going to have to be continuing to tank swap with the captain back and forth as their stacks wear off and are reapplied. The captain, during this time period, is making sure that the aggro of the DPS target is not on the DPS. So typically, in this case, right near the beginning of this wave, as the Guardian is to the north taking care of the worms, the Captain tank is grabbing aggro on whichever Frostcaller is dying first. You'll notice that we've marked where the totems typically drop at the beginning of each wave here. What the totems do is they have an aura that is rather large. In fact, if they are dropped at the locations currently established, it will actually overlap at the center of the arena and actually have double the totem strength in that area as well. What they do is they increase the damage that these people take within that area. So if you're in one totem, you take about 15% more damage from all sources. And if you're in both, that's approximately 30% damage taken from all sources, more than you would normally. So making sure to not be in that overlap is very important, especially for the DPS group, but pretty much for everyone involved. You can survive standing in one totem if you need to, but if there's any way that you can, getting out of all of the totems is actually very helpful, either to the north or to the south, or once one Frostcaller has died, the totem will go away with them.
That is the exact reason why we take the frost collars out first. Now, typically, what we have is the Berg will come over to the west side and they will crowd control this frost collar while the LM crowd controls the two worms initially. The hunters will then take out this frost collar. Once the frost collar dies, the totem will go away. Thus, there is absolutely no need for you to target the totems. Then the hunter's DPS will swap to the west frost collar, take it out. Once it's down, then that totem goes away. At this time, it is very useful for all the DPSers to loosely group up in the center. And you will then next focus on the worms. Now, because the whelplings are putting puddles down all over the place, if the group was mostly to the north, then that means that that entire area will be full of puddles and the tanks need to move again.
When the tanks have to move, honestly, they can go wherever is needed, so long as they're not in a whole bunch of puddles or putting their DPS in a position that they're in a whole bunch of puddles either. As long as the worms are alive, you have to be very careful about what you do as you pull them around the arena. As I mentioned before, the worms will often aggro wipe and look for someone near themselves. If they're taunted during that period, they will chase whoever had taunted them, but they have a chance again to aggro wipe themselves again later and look for someone close to them. So, whenever you are moving, say, for example, if the Guardian decided to move south to get away from puddles, if he had to pull the worms with him, he would have to make sure that they weren't running directly past a burglar or a lore master or some hunters, because they might stop and actually turn and kill very quickly those people in your group instead. So it's oftentimes very helpful if you can communicate as you're doing that and make sure you have enough taunts ready to pull any worms that aggro wipe themselves. The captain may have to help with this, but usually the guardian can take care of it themselves. Keep in mind that during this entire setting, the captain and the guardian do have to be moving the boss back and forth between themselves before one of them builds up too many maul stacks that they'll actually die in one or two shots.
Then, after the hunters take out the two worms, all that you have left is the whelplings. Typically, at this stage, our guardian and captain are positioned to the south across from each other, or up on the north side, or in any configuration, and they will just pass the boss back and forth while the DPS focus on burning down the whelplings. Now, the nice thing about leaving the whelplings for the last is that at this point, the whelplings do not have any corruptions or reflex on them, so your entire team can just AoE them and get them down super quickly.
Once all of the ads are dead, you can return to your normal configuration of how we begin the fight, of just having one tank up against a wall, tanking the boss, and everyone else loosely grouped up on the opposite side, such that you're not getting frontaled at all either. Something to note that I hadn't mentioned before is that the boss will actually do a random stun on someone nearby who is not the main tank at the time. So he will sometimes run away, stun someone, and then run back to his aggro target. You need to be a little bit careful with how you position, such that he won't frontal anyone on his way back.
For melee classes, it is best to stay up close behind the boss uh, during this phase within melee range. For all the range classes, it is much easier to back up about 20 meters away from the boss because if you're outside of that zone, he actually won't target you and run to you. He will only run to those within his melee range. Note that his melee range is about 20 meters, which is much larger than, say, for example, a Guardian's melee range. So during this entire phase, the Runekeeper will mostly be focused on healing whoever has the boss at that time, because the boss will be doing a lot of damage. Berg will be keeping up disables on the boss throughout the entire fight. The lore master should be keeping up lores on the boss throughout the entire fight. And then the minstrel is mostly responsible for keeping the DPS side alive and then throwing a couple of heals to the tank.
Bjorning is a little bit of an interesting point here in the fight because the Bjorning actually does whatever he's needed. He should keep bees and armor crush up on whatever the primary target is, whether it be a mob during the wave or the boss during a damage portion. But he is also there to heal whoever needs it. The Bjorning being one of the only classes that has raid-wide heals means that he can actually be in either group and move to wherever he needs to hit the most people that he can. At 50% of the boss's health, he does another hide phase. So again, he'll run to the center, do his smash just as before, and everybody should be running to hide in a rune. So it's interesting to think now, again, just as with the last hide phase, of which tank needs to take the boss after this. Now, in preparation for getting to 30% boss's health, that means you've got 20% of his health to burn through before it. What we've found with our group, with the amount of damage that we deal, we actually have the Guardian take the boss aggro after this phase. We normally have him pull it to the northwestern corner, but you could bring it somewhere else if you needed to, just for some reason that you've decided. We like to bring it to the north because of the way we're going to be doing things on the third and last add wave. As everybody else comes back out, the Guardian is taking the damage of the boss at the beginning, and of course the captain's going to have to come take it at some point. What you're going to need to do here is make sure that when you're going into the 31% range, the captain is the one that's taking the aggro at that point. Now you can have them in the same corner, you can have them moving across, you can have them doing any sorts of things with aggro here based on however you wish. We normally stick to a single corner, but you can change how you do it if you want. When you do get to that 31%, you want to be making sure the captain has aggro, or is gaining aggro at that point. So when you get to 31% of the boss's health, the captain takes over for the Guardian. At this point, the captain is actually going to want to bring that boss closer to the center of the room at the northern side, or the southern side, depending on what you've decided to do. The reason for this is that when the frost callers spawn, they want to go heal the boss, and they will actually move down the stairs a little bit if they cannot see the boss at the time. So you want to be able to make sure that they have visibility on the boss at the beginning before stuff happens here. The Guardian is actually going to want to be moving very much like Wave 1 to the side that's going to get mezzed and be there before the stuff actually spawns. He's going to War Chant at the beginning, Thrill of Danger as he moves to the other side, and Challenge when he gets over there to grab the rest of the melee stuff that's coming down the stairs as well. At which point, he will again take things to North Stairs, with Captain moving to one of the corners, making sure that at least both of the Guardians are on the Guardian tank at that point.
Which side do you prefer to go to, left or right?
Either one is fine. I like to go first to the left, to the west side, simply because as the captain, I prefer to be pulling guardians over there before the other way around.
Okay. So after you, so right now,
Mhm.
all of these mobs are focused on the guardian.
You're absolutely right, except for one minor detail that actually is rather important to the group. At the beginning, and a couple of times throughout this wave, there's actually going to be a red eye that gets put on a random person within the raid. This red eye is going to cause all of the sappers and all of the warriors to chase and kill whichever target that is that gets the red eye. You might get lucky and it be on one of the two tanks, and that's great because then those mobs just run to the tanks and you can just tank them. But if you get unlucky, then maybe a Bjorning or maybe a Runekeeper or even a Hunter might have to notice very quickly that they have a red eye and kite around the room to survive the sappers and the warriors that are chasing them.
The benefit of the knowing that the guardian is going to be pulling the mobs to the north prior to the eye dropping is so that you, if you're, say, the hunter, you know that everything on the south side is clear. And so that gives you a little bit of a head start to start running and kiting away from the warriors and sappers. So they'll kind of start following you like so, right? And then you're just going to be kiting around. Now, when you do your circles, you don't want to go straight and stop and then turn, because the warriors and sappers are trained, or programmed to go around in an arc. So you want to make sure that when you're kiting them, you're kiting in a loose arc or oval. And if you do this to the south side, that is the best because the warriors do a frontal, and you want to make sure that you're not accidentally frontaling any of the other players that are in the center, taking care of the rest.
Exactly right. I believe the red eye lasts for either 10 or 15 seconds, possibly even a little bit longer. At least it feels like it in the midst of the fight. But once the red eye is gone, those warriors and sappers are simply going to go back to their main aggro target, which really should be the guardian at this point. During this time, those frost callers that we mentioned earlier have started to come down the stairs just a little bit, and as with wave number 2, they're going to drop their totems near themselves when they do so. Again, if you're lucky and they've done it in the normal positions, then it'll be such that it overlaps in the middle, but otherwise you have a single totem on either side and none to the north and to the south. During this time period, with both of the tanks, still of course tank swapping the boss, we have to make sure that the TA aggro is maintained somehow. Normally, this is going to be the captain taking care of Frostcaller aggro. With the Frostcallers being the only real targets that deal sustained tactical damage, that means that the captain can take that damage while the Guardian deals with most of the physical damage that comes from this fight. With their block, parry, and evade, they're much better suited to doing that. The Guardian tank is also much better suited to maintaining the corruption removal on the Guardian adds as well. So, until most of the ranged or tactical damage goes down, the Guardian tank is usually going to be holding the Guardian add aggro for a significantly longer period of time than he did on wave 1. Once both frost callers are dead, assuming that you're targeting them relatively quickly, the captain tank will want to grab the guardian add aggro, just as he did in wave 1, and move them away from whichever targets you're killing at that point.
When the ads initially spawn, everybody should be grouped up loosely in the center. Um, the LM can prepare by throwing down tar and keeping up lures on the boss, and the Berg will keep up disables on the boss. Then the sappers are pretty much going to run towards the center as they follow the tank. They're going to drop a bunch of puddles in the center. What needs to happen is for this group to move towards the kill site. The Berg will already be moving towards that site because you will be coming to mess the northeast BA. The LM will be moving to the left to mess the west BAs, just like phase 1. And the only difference here is that we have now the extra frost collar that the red cappy will take care of. So as the Guardian tank moves the warriors, the guardians, and the sappers to the north, right, what we are left with is a board that looks something like this. The RK will be positioned up here more or less to heal both the tanks. The bear will be floating around as he needs to, and the minstrel and the DPS group will be very much running a marathon all over the place. We will take out the southeast BA first, then the east frost collar, because those are the two targets that do not have active crowd control on them. Then we will take out the northeast BA. Then typically what we like to do is take out the west frost collar, and then there's usually a decision to be made by the main target assist. If your group is doing a lot of damage, and you're burning through these targets very quickly, that target assist might decide, well, since the morale of these two BAs are so low, we may as well take them out first. Alternatively, you can decide, well, we're really struggling with getting through the bleeds from the sappers, so you decide to take the sappers out first and then the BAs. So by now, you've taken out those BAs, the frost collar and that BA, you've taken out this frost collar, and you're left with a board like this. You still will have the whelplings creating a ton of chaos all over the place, but you have a decision to make. Daughion, does what the guards are doing affect this decision at all?
The only part of this decision I would say is that assuming that the captain has grabbed both Guardian adds, he needs to be positioned away from whatever is being killed next. Normally, at this point, I would actually have the captain on the northeast, yes, exactly like that, with both guardians and sometimes the boss as well. Keep in mind that the boss must be switched. I'm going to repeat this many, many times. You must keep tank swapping the boss. The guardian tank can have the sappers in the other corner, or he can be kiting them around the room if he needs to. Once the frost collars are dead and the totems are no longer worried about, he has a lot of space that he can move around as long as your group of players are very cognizant of where he's moving. Keep in mind that the warriors do have a frontal damage that they will deal and bleeds that they can cause while they do that. So if your guardian tank wishes to kite, then you need to make sure to leave them enough space that he doesn't get in front of other players and cause a bunch of damage to them. This is where I like to tell my players that it's up to the individual to make sure that they stay alive by positioning and by using their skills the best they can to help. Making sure that the Guardian adds are away from the damaged target is the key thing during this portion of the phase. The Guardian and the Captain are both making sure that the corruptions are being removed from the Guardian adds and from the Warrior adds as much as possible.
So typically we like to get rid of the sappers first because they're doing a lot of bleed damages for us, and that seems to stabilize the fight for us. Then we go back, we finish off these two BAs, and by doing that we give the burglar enough time to get up here and start removing the corruption from the warriors. There are a total of 4 warriors, so Startling Twist will work great on these. if the tank at that time ends up having, say, the boss and the guardian on him, that should still be fine. But we wait to do Startling Twist until we typically only have the warriors left and maybe the boss on him, because the burglar does have a 6 target limit. And then once the warriors go down, we focus on the whelplings, and then we're back to having just the boss and the 2 guardians.
If you've made it to this point in the fight, you can actually have a lot of reason to celebrate. Getting to this point is probably the hardest thing. Wave 3 is the part that takes most groups the longest to figure out. Getting to this point, you can actually breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief and treat it just like in Wave 1 of burning down both guardians separated from each other and separated from the boss, making sure that whichever tank has 2 is able to hold until the other guardian dies. Then the other tank can take the boss and you can kill the final guardian.
The healers during this fight, the Runekeeper healer is going to be mostly focused on keeping the 2 tanks up at all times. The 2 tanks should have enough survivability skills on their own to help the Runekeeper through that.
What I've normally had the captains do is actually that the tank captain would run blue mark on the boss at all times,
Okay.
keeping it on there even when it's on the guardian tank so that that mark is healing whichever people are around the boss at the time. That allows the red captain to either use red mark on targets that need to be burned down very quickly, such as the first frost caller that gets an Othes or something like that whenever those big burn phases are. The red mark is actually worth using during those time periods. When that's not the case, however, the red captain will often also use blue mark on whichever target is being killed so that he keeps the sustainability of the rest of the people in the raid alive. Now, as Laloa mentioned, you might want to have one of them use blue mark, say the red captain, and then the tank captain could use yellow mark on the boss as well to keep him alive, to keep himself alive, I should say. The reason to do this would be if your captain tank, specifically, is not as well geared as you would like them to be, or if they are the weaker of the 2 tanks in general. Doing this is not needed, but is helpful if you're in that situation. We like to have the flexibility of that red mark on those burn phases when possible.
The minstrel in this entire phase, will be sticking very closely to the hunters, because the minstrel's main responsibility is to make sure that the hunters and the red captain stay alive throughout the entire fight. The other responsibility of the minstrel is to ensure that all bleeds are taken care of, that the sappers will drop. And once again, it is very important to save all the big group heals until the bleeds are actually thrown by the sappers. Then it's a healing race on the those that aren't in the minstrels group to try and get them stabilized. Oftentimes, the minstrel may call out to the Cappy or the Arcane Bear to help heal somebody up if the minstrel's healer's output is simply not enough.
The bear is very flexible and very fluid, I should say, in this fight. During each of the ad waves, he is moving a whole lot, trying to get bees at the very least on the target assist, and using armor crush on it as well when possible, but specifically trying to be near the most number of people that are taking damage at any point in time. If they are able to keep the majority of the people alive, then they can also throw a little bit of healing towards the tanks, but their primary role is to keep the group as a whole alive. It's a strange one to think about because it is much more reactive instead of proactive as the other healers are typically. but the bear is there to react to those bursty moments when four different whelplings drop a puddle on a hunter, and they're there to help get that hunter back up to full health again.
Once all the ads are down, we will all group up loosely again behind the boss and get ready for the next part.
Once you've reached the 25% phase here, the boss does yet another big ground smash for the entire arena. This is another hide phase where everybody will want to move into a corner and hide in one of the runes. The big thing here is just making sure that you're able to make it. Getting past wave 3 is a massive thing, so you don't want to blow anything at this point, because honestly, it gets a little bit easier from here on out. So, let's say you've made it past wave 3. At this point, after 25%, you're burning your way down to 20%. Now, after the hide, with the previous hides, it kind of mattered which tank was taking it first. Now, the nice thing about this part is it doesn't really matter who takes it first or second here. What I like to do is whoever was tanking it previous to hide probably already has one or two stacks. Let's say it was the Guardian. Maybe they have one or two stacks. They can take it first for a single hit, and then the other tank can immediately take over. Now, one key thing here in this phase is now that you're at the point where it is kind of a DPS and healing race at this point, you can actually move your minstrel into the same group as your tanks, switching it with the bear, who doesn't matter which group they're in, to be able to heal the tanks. You won't have to worry about damage to your DPS or your healers or your Berg or your LM at this point. It's all entirely going to be falling on the heads of the tanks. So, beginning it doesn't really matter too much which of your tanks has aggro first. One of them will take it to one of the four pillars in the rune. You'll notice here on this slide, we've actually included what's called chains. Now, those chains are actually up above each of the four pillars in the room, right next to the stairs, if you will. And so these four, being marked where they are, we'll have one of our tanks first, bring them to those location until you burn it down to 20%. Now, at the point of getting to 20%, what you should have is at least one, if not both of the tanks, next to the pillar, with the boss fighting them right there at it. You want to position them in such a way, as Maloa has marked here, that the chain is above the boss's head. The rest of your group will be, of course, as before, on the opposite side of where the boss is, to make sure that they are, again, within that range of the stun, such that he moves and such like that, but that he comes back, and that he stays consistently underneath that chain. So, let's say you make it to 20%. At this point, we enter what is referred to as either the chain phase or the warlord phase, however you want to talk about it. When he reaches 20%, on tier 3, he'll actually heal himself back up to 40% of his original health. He becomes named Warlord Dushtalbach, or whatever his name actually is to begin with. And there are lore reasons behind that, but that's not important to the fight. Basically, this is the quote-unquote enrage phase, if you will. There are a couple of mechanics that come into play here. You never don't have to worry about any ads, don't have to worry about any puddles or anything like that. Just the boss and the chains. So, once he goes into this warlord phase, he actually begins to deal distributed damage on his attacks. At this point, then, you definitely want to be bringing both of your tanks, both the Captain and the Guardian, in to start taking the damage together. In fact, it's even important enough that you would want the Captain to make sure that their pet is taking part of that damage as well. If he has to resummon that pet, dismiss and resummon, that's perfectly fine, but you need to make sure that that distributed damage is distributed to as many targets as are feasible within your group. So, at this point as well, you're going to be wanting to burn as much damage onto him as possible. You want to use Oathies, you want to use Ancient Craft, you want to use everything that you can to get as much damage as possible here in this first little bit. What's happening with the boss now is that he's not just building stacks of Maul on the tank, which, by the way, build even faster during this phase. He's also going to be building stacks of Warlord's Wrath, or something similar to that, on himself, tiering from 1 up to 10 also. What that does for him is decreases his damage that comes in, increases the damage that he deals, and I believe also increases his movement speed. Kind of the inverse of the Maul stack that he applies to the tank. You must keep tank swapping during this period because he only applies the Maul stacks to the target that he initially hits, not the ones that it distributes to. So that's why you still have to be swapping back and forth between your tanks at this time. It's very normal for your tanks to reach tier 3 or even tier 4 during this if you're not careful. What happens with the stacks that he's building on himself is he builds them at approximately the same rate as he does with Maul stacks, but the brittle chains, which is what they're called, will become targetable a few seconds into the fight at this point. These can be destroyed by ranged sources, so pretty much your hunters, your arcaes, wardens, ones like that, can deal damage to the brittle chains, and when they are destroyed, they actually fall onto, hopefully, the boss, and get rid of a large number of those Warlord's Wrath stacks, meaning that he no longer deals as much damage, he can take more damage, etc., etc. There are 4 different chains within the room, so you have a certain limited number of opportunities to decrease the stacks of the Warlord. So, let's say that he's gone from 20% back up to 40%. You've used Oathies, you've used Ancient Craft. You get him down as much as you can. When he approximately reaches 3 stacks, you want your damage to switch to the chain. Have them destroy that chain as fast as possible, because then by the time it falls, it should restack the Warlord stacks down to 0, allowing you to deal more damage yet again. So thinking about it that way, that means that he's going to start again building stacks once the chain has fallen. You have 3 more chains within the room that eventually you'll need to move to. So let's say at this point that your first chain has already come down. You have the opportunity now to decide how quickly do you move to the next one. Keep in mind during this time that the boss is pretty often moving or not moving to stun a random target around him and then move back to his current target. You're also tank swapping, so you're switching back and forth between the two. What we like to do when you move to the next pillar, let's say the southern pillar directly beneath where we currently are, across the stairs, go ahead and move down there. While we're doing that, we like to make sure that whichever tank is not having aggro at the moment is immune to stun. That means having the Lore Master use SI on whichever tank is not having aggro during that movement. We've had a couple of times, or at least once, where during that movement, the off tank, shall we say, has gotten stunned and been unable to move at the same time as the other tank, and it has caused that tank to die, allowing then the other tank to die, and it just ping-pongs back and forth into oblivion from there. So you get to the next chain. Great, success. Making sure that you get there is a very key part of that. At that point, then, usually you'll already have enough stacks up on the Warlord that you want to switch immediately to killing the chain, if not already killing it while you've been moving. The idea is, at this point, you should be able to get the chain down quickly enough that it, again, removes the Warlord stacks, and you're able to get more damage in at this point. Once he begins stacking up again, of course, you gotta move to a new chain again.
The most important thing to note when moving for everybody who aren't tanks is to get out of the tank's way.
That's right.
The
That's exactly
boss
right.
the boss does massive frontals, so it's best for everybody to retreat a couple of steps almost to the center, allow the tanks to move the boss, then as soon as the boss is back into position, for everybody to get back on his butt.
That's exactly right. You have to make sure that both you're taking distributed damage with those who want to be in front of him, and you're not taking distributed damage with those who can't survive it. We have had times where a bear who's very tanky has stepped in, or a burglar who's very tanky has stepped in to help with a single instance of the distributed damage, but that's been very rare and usually hasn't been needed. But if you're struggling a little bit, you may have people who can step in to absorb a single instance of that distribution and then step back out. So you get to the third chain. You're actually very close to being done at this point. Most of the time, by the time you get to here, you have Oathies coming back off cooldown again. So you take down the chain immediately, you throw Oathies on the boss, and most of the time, with our damage group at least, the boss is able to be killed at the third chain. If that doesn't happen, you probably still have the fourth chain to the north as well that you could move to and do the same thing yet again.
And then when the boss is dead, you celebrate.
That's exactly right. You do a little happy dance, you loot a chest, and you profit.
um, Daughion, I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me today and helping us walk through this incredibly tank heavy fight.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be here. It is very tank heavy, you're absolutely right, but I'm being very honest when I say you need to have each individual in your raid being accountable for what they're supposed to be doing to truly succeed and really master this fight.
Indeed, indeed. If you would like to actually see a recording of this fight, go ahead and click the watch next video, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye. If you enjoyed today's video, please hit the like and subscribe button. For more amazing training and one-on-one coaching, please click the link to the LOTRO Endgame Challenge in the description below. This is a special 2-day training event where I help players plan out their exact strategy for reaching their goals in endgame raiding. Whether you've just valored a tune or are returning to the game after some time, this challenge will show you exactly what you need to do to gear up quickly, find a great raiding group, and have loads of fun racing through endgame content. Thanks for watching.